Hello everyone and welcome. In today's video I'll be creating a character for my game. I know I may have a bit of an advantage here as I'm also writing the encounters, but fortunately nothing is complete yet and I only have a loose plan of what my character's encounters will look like. So I wanted to create a Tudor Druid, firstly because Druids are my favourite class, and secondly because I think a Druid suits this campaign quite well, as most people in Tudor times lived off the land. First of all, I want to think about the type of Druid to have in my game. Now, I like the idea of the Circle of the Swamp Druids. These Druids have a bit of a rough and ready flair about them, which I really like. Also, swamps are very inhospitable places, so I can imagine Druids who thrive in swamps appreciate being away from the city or townsfolk. This also makes a Swamp Druid an ideal candidate as a clandestine agent as little is known about them. Now, as I'm creating their backstory, I want to hark back to the video I made last week and try and use some of the pointers from the player's handbook. So with that in mind, let's look at personality traits. Now, the technique the player's handbook gives is to look at the stats and see which are the lowest and highest. So with Sephi, a little woodland elf, her highest stat is wisdom and her lowest stat is strength. So on a basic level, Sephi is very worldly or has a lot of common sense. She's super intuitive and perceptive. But what does that mean? If Sephi were to describe herself, she may say, I can predict when a thunderstorm is about to happen because the birds change their song. Here we understand she listens to birdsong enough to make predictions from it. This not only demonstrates that she is in touch with the natural world, but might also indicate any potential animals she may wild shape into. Perhaps birds are her favourite type of animal. I feel a lack of strength can be brought forward in role-playing, for example, by avoiding melee attacks and using ranged weapons. In other words, strength is great for fighters who want to knock someone or something out with one punch or to withstand being shoved around. Perhaps this weakness is holding her back slightly. Is she too risk-averse in some instances where she doubts her strength? Is this something she wants to work on? Does she rely on wild shaping too much to escape conflict? And if so, does she wild shape into a bird too quickly? Right, so we got her personality traits in order. What about her ideals? So before I choose an ideal, I feel it's good to mention her alignment, which is chaotic good. So with that in mind, I saw an ideal that I felt was a good fit, which is tyrants must not be allowed to oppress the people. I think this is quite accurate, as some people described Henry VIII as a tyrant king due to his behaviour and outbursts. So maybe our little Sephi, while she is quite happy living in her swampland, away from the cities and towns, still hears snippets of current politics. I do need to figure out why she visits a city though, but this is coming later. What is her motivation? That word again, to visit London. I definitely need to work on this ideal and make something a bit more meaningful to Sephi, but for now, I really like its sentiment and think there is a lot I could build on, especially if you think about Henry VIII's views on religion and how he destroyed the monasteries and sold their riches. For those who don't know, monasteries at that time provided a lot of help in the community in terms of healthcare and education. They were really important on a population level, so their loss would have been deeply felt. Next up is bonds. A bond is a connection to something a person values. This could be community, family, or location. So for Sephi, I want her to have a bit of fire in her belly as she is going to be recruited to save Anne Boleyn. So I want to build on her ideal of being really intolerant of tyrannical regimes. So maybe her bond is that she's on a quest to stand up for the little guy who cannot defend himself. That's all well and good, but what exactly has pulled her out of her swamp and made her venture into the city? Now I'm thinking about going down the lines of maybe city expansion, and Sephi is worried about her swampland being developed by greedy nobles wanting to expand their realm. The population was beginning to increase under Henry VIII's reign, partly due to a boom in trade from woolen items, which I'm thinking is likely clothing. Sephi visits London to learn from a wise healer who made the move to support fellow healers who were struggling to keep up with all the sickness. London was particularly overcrowded at this point, and diseases were running rife, especially the sweating sickness, which almost killed Anne Boleyn. Not much is known about the sweating sickness now, as it eventually vanished. However, sweating sickness was so bad, Thomas More, one of Henry VIII's advisors, wrote, "One is safer on the battlefield than in the city." This would also fuel why Sephi is determined not to have her swampland desecrated, as she fears the disease and pestilence city life promotes. Right, let's distill this into a succinct bond prompt, which we can pop into the character sheet. I love my home and would do anything to protect my community and sacred swamp spirits. I may work on this some more, but it's a good start. Right, this takes us up to the final character building plot, which is flaws. So as I explained in my last video, there are 3 types of flaws: minor, major and fatal. I won't go into what her minor flaws are here, as these are on the whole inconsequential, and I cover them in my previous video. What I'm interested in though is Sephi's major and potentially fatal flaws. A major flaw would be, I suppose, her inclination to avoid close-up conflict, as she is anxious about lacking strength. Moreover, because she is chaotic, Her wild shaping into a bird may prove an obstacle, and in fact put other people at risk. Instead, if she kept a cooler head and was more strategic about when she transforms, this will benefit her and her party more. Now, her fatal flaw could stem from her distrust of nobles and perhaps city folk. Does she turn down help from powerful allies simply because she prefers a community of swamp folk? Does this leave her isolated and vulnerable? Is this the most important flaw she has to overcome? As a flaw, this could sound like, I protect and treat those who are weak and sick. I have no time for those in privileged positions. They don't understand the struggle and beauty of my community. Or is there something else? Has she in fact strayed too far? Maybe the threat from the city and king was not as serious as she envisioned, and she has neglected her community while she was away. Did her ideal of ousting tyrants drive her away from the very community she sought to protect? Now I want to take you on a little tour of my character sheet, which I mocked up on D&D and Beyond. So here we have her ability scores. So as we can see, her wisdom is her highest score, and strength is her lowest. I've made her dexterity a bit higher than usual due to her not having a lot of strength. In other words, I want her to be able to dodge out of harm's way quickly rather than get hit. Next we have spells. So cantrip-wise we have guidance, next is poison spray, and then thunderclap. I was inspired to choose thunderclap after writing that one-liner about her personality trait. First level spells include cure wounds, of course, as she identifies the healer. We also have fairy fire, which is also another collaborative spell as it benefits the group, like guidance. Like thunderclap, I chose Thunderwave for backstory reasons. I imagine her swamp from time to time being at the centre of storms. The thunder and lightning raging, rain falling into bubbling bogs, and deer running for cover while water snakes retreat into the river. She's just left the swamp before meeting the tavern after all, so maybe her spells reflect the environment she lives in. Absorb elements I also chose for a similar reason, as she can utilise the energy from thunder and lightning to power her attacks. At the third level, Sephi gets access to Acid Arrow and Darkness, which are great spells. I'm not sure how useful Darkness will be in an already dark and dreary dungeon, but I'm sure she'll find some use for it. Acid Arrow is a nasty but effective spell, which will hopefully come in handy. Right, so starting equipment. We have a standard wooden shield and a not so simple melee weapon, which is a Staff of Power. Now I know this is a very rare item, but I want to make it part of her backstory. Perhaps she healed an old wizard who moved to the swamp for a quieter life, basically a swamp sage. The sage then gifted her this staff, though she knows nothing about it. She uses it as a basic staff, purely for bludgeoning, but occasionally she hears it hum and experiences small static or electric shock every now and then when she picks it up. Before I forget, I want to talk about the god Sephi worships. So her god is Sylvanus, the forest father. Now outside of D&D, Sylvanus is a Roman god who watched over fields and protected cattle from wolves. Back to D&D Sylvanus though, his personality is wild and unpredictable, which is why I think Sephi suits a chaotic good alignment. Right, that's all for today folks, and I'll see you in the next one.